always, I never know when it's actually going to start. So I'm just watching the screen, and hopefully we are good to go. So hello, everybody. I am your host, Eric Smith, and we're jumping right into my favorite horror with author, podcaster, and cat lover, Mary SanGiovanni. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody.
Well, I'm just going to start with probably the question that is on everybody's mind. How are the kittens?
Oh, the kittens are good. In fact, at some point, inevitably, there will be a kitten interruption. They're very busy, and they're just about big enough that they can get onto shelves and refrigerators and countertops and everything. So yeah, there'll probably be, at some point, one of them walking by or something. But they're doing really well. They just had a kitty checkup a couple of days ago, and they're doing good. So far, so good. Knock on wood.
Good. Well, kitty interruptions are always welcome.
It's a little bit Wild Kingdom in the house though. It's funny how the shift of the balance of power, it kind of goes out the window when you're the minority animal in the house. There are more cats than there are people in this house, so they kind of have run of the place now. And we just accept our furry overlords, and it's all good.
Sure. I mean, that's the way every house should be. So now all of our cats are outdoor cats.
We have one outdoor cat. Growing up, it was never something that my family did, so it makes me uncomfortable because I worry about them all the time, and I worry about, are they fed? Are they safe? Are they warm enough? But Brian's grown up with outdoor cats his whole life, so he's comfortable, feeding them. He has a little box for the kittens. Cat mommy is technically our outdoor cat, and she lives on our porch, and he has a little house for her with a little bed, and she does okay out there. So she's a tough cat. All the more power to her, but it's still something like, if it were up to me, I would take them all in, all of them, and then it really would be Wild Kingdom in here. It would just, everything would go back to the animals.
There are, I have to think about this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 cats out in the backyard, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Well, because one of them keeps having kittens.
Yeah, yeah.
We had, at one point, we were trying to catch them and have them fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And so a couple of them are, but the rest were too smart.
That's what we're running into with Josie, our outdoor cat, is that I think Brian would like to catch her and just take her in to get fixed. And she's just proved too smart so far for all of his machinations. So she's still out there doing her thing.
They're fed twice a day. There's a nice box with blankets and everything set up on the back porch. There's even a little tiny space heater out there.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
And at feeding time, 3 or 4 of them will run into the house when we open the door to take the food out, and then they just run right back out. I've got 3 of them will jump into my lap if I'm out on the porch sitting.
That's nice.
They'll jump up. They're very friendly for the most part. There's some kittens now that are still a little skittish.
Yeah, yeah.
But you gotta love cats.
What is cuter than a sleeping cat, though? Possibly a sleeping baby, but I don't know. I think it rivals.
I could scroll through the pictures on my phone, show you all the sleeping cats and playing cats and everything else. All right. Let's see. Let me reattach that. So Ghostwriters Podcast. You folks talk about a lot of bad movies.
We do.
So, first of all, how do you find these movies? Do you just scroll through your streaming services?
I've developed a system. It's funny you ask, because I was telling Matt and Summer this actually the other day, and Brian as well. I developed a system. I have this sort of love-hate thing for bad horror horror movies. It's mostly horror movies, sometimes science fiction movies. I enjoy them to a point, but it's almost like a masochistic enjoyment, I think. But my system is dependent on the streaming service, because I've noticed that you can't really go by the stars or the skulls or the rating system that any of these streaming services has. If it's got 5 stars or skulls or whatever, then it's probably a cult classic. That doesn't mean it's a good movie. It just means that there are enough fans out there that this has this sort of hallowed place of honor in horror fandom, this movie. If it's got 4 stars, it's probably a passable film. It's probably a decent film. Anything less than that is generally crap. Now, I can't say that for 100% of the time. Every once in a while, I'll watch something that's a 3-star and be pleasantly surprised. But you can pretty much guarantee that if it's got 2 stars or 2 skulls or whatever, if it's in the 2 range, it's going to be crap, unlike anything that you've ever subjected your eyeballs to before. In fact, we've even coined the term "fulching the eyeballs" when watching these things, because It really is an assault on the eyes sometimes. And that's if I'm looking for a movie for, say, Brian and I to watch on date night or something, I try to pick something that's got 5 or 4 stars, because Brian is significantly less appreciative of bad movies than I am. And then I get my remote control rights revoked for periods of time because I've picked really crap. But if I'm looking for something for the show, sometimes for fun, I'll go for one of these bad movies, just because I want to support indie horror filmmaking. I do. And there are a lot of people out there with no budget, but fantastic ideas, and that do amazing things on basically with very few resources. And I find that sort of an impressive skill. Storytelling in a visual form is not easy just because it's a horror story and you have a camera. And so I think that's why sometimes I tend to be hard on some of these movies, possibly harder than I would have been, in the past when I was just watching things for fun. It's because I want to find those gems. I want to be able to tell people, like, hey, here's this completely unheard of movie. They did it for a budget of like $1.50, and it turned out to be really, really good. Unfortunately, those are few and far between. There's just a lot of crap out there, and I don't know, because some of these streaming services have no standards, or what the deal is, or just anybody can upload anything to anywhere. And there's also, to be fair, a subgenre of bad movies which are intentionally bad. They're comedically bad. And I try to, and at first I didn't understand that. And I think I was watching these movies with this very serious eye toward, oh my God, it's almost like the equivalent of that person that walks out of the house with a shirt so loud that you can see it from space. And you think to yourself, like, don't you have friends that tell you shouldn't go out of the house like that? It's almost like, don't you have friends that tell you that you have no talent making movies? And then over time, I realized that, no, these people made this movie this way on purpose. This was deliberate. And I don't know if that makes it better or worse, but it does sometimes make it a little bit more palatable.
I often find it difficult to define that line between good, bad, and just bad.
Yes.
For me, I think one of the things is budget. Mm-hmm. If it's, if it doesn't have the greatest acting, greatest special effects, but it has a super, super, super low budget, it's going to get a lot more slack. Or maybe I should say it's going to get less slack the higher the budget goes. Because to me, if you're pouring more money into it, you should be making a better product.
I would agree there. I do think sometimes there are good films on a low budget.
Sure.
But yes, I see what you're saying. Like, you think that the more money poured into it, the more that you could at least hire an editor or hire people who can actually act. For me, it comes down to, I mean, if you're looking at something like I'll give an example. I'll call him out because I've called him out before. Carousel. Okay.
Okay, see, now I was going to bring this up. We might have an argument here.
I think that is one of those good bad movies.
Oh, okay. So we're on the same.
I do.
I love that movie.
And here's why. Because clearly, I mean, if you watch it sort of superficially, if you're not really paying attention, then yeah, it's got characters that you kind of want to see, get gored by a unicorn, and it's got an insane premise, it's got some absolutely ridiculous deaths, but clearly the people who made this movie, they have a sense of humor and they love the genre. Yes. You can see it in the kinds of jokes they make. You can see it in the kind of, inside references to other horror movies that they make. They get what they're doing. They recognize it for what it is, and they're putting it out there for fun. It's a spoof. It's gay, and those can be incredibly enjoyable. I've watched Carousel now like 2 or 3 times, and I've come to really appreciate what they're doing there.
Have you seen the sequel?
Not yet. I can't find it on any of the streaming services we have yet.
There are actually some really impressive gore effects.
Really?
Yeah. And it's a very different movie than the first one, still hilarious. And that's sort of the second thing for me that delineates the good, bad, and the just bad is entertainment.
Yes. And like the Attack of the Killer Donuts. That's a movie that knows that it's a premise that's inane in some ways, but the donuts are funny as hell because they have little teeth, Mm-hmm. They embrace the absurd and they recognize it. I wouldn't say it's self-referential. It's not so cagey that way, you know what I mean? But there is an understanding, like of an appreciation for horror and for the old like B movies of the 50s. There's that kind of I think almost reverential acknowledgement of those kinds of cinematic masterpieces, and that does to me differentiate between that and a bad movie.
Well, we have a twice yearly convention around here called Cinema Wasteland, and we get a lot of independent filmmakers, and I try to be supportive of them. I bought Carousel directly from the director.
Nice.
Among some other things that he's done.
Mm-hmm.
And Dustin Mills, I think it's Dustin, I can never remember if it's Dustin or Dunstan, who did Puppet Monster Massacre, which I absolutely love.
Oh my God. That sounds like something I need to see. I need to have it in my life right now.
They're all like Muppets. I believe all the characters are named after horror directors. I know one of them is named Raimi.
Oh, that's funny.
And there's, I think he's a Nazi, and is the bad guy, and his henchman is a rabbit. I'm trying to remember, it's been a while, but it's got blood, nudity, violence. It's hilarious. It is absolutely fantastic. And I, again, met the director, was able to buy that directly from him, try to support him. He did Easter Casket as well.
Oh, that's funny.
So yeah, and as long as, when you can see the heart that went into it, and again, as long as it's entertaining, as long as I'm not bored, which unfortunately some movies are just boring.
Oh yeah.
Now, do you have any ritual to prepare yourself when you're sitting down and you're going to see a bad movie, like, I don't know, getting drunk?
Oh, I make myself a tea. Okay. And I usually wait for Brian to leave the house, because inevitably, if I don't, then at some point he walks to the room and says, "Why are you wasting your life this way? There are so many better things that you could be doing right now." And I realize that he's right. So I usually wait till he's out of the house to watch the worst of them. That's pretty much it. And then I get the phone ready because often I will text Summer and Matt a stream of conscious viewing thing, almost like Mystery Science Theater. Usually the comments where they're probably even too mean to say in public, like, oh my God, this person is terrible. Things like that, I will give them sort of running commentary that we can then use as notes if we talk about the movie. And it's mostly, I do that for the same reason people be like, ew, this smells terrible, smell it, And
Yes.
I'll do that to Summer and Matt all the time. Like, here, oh, I'm watching this movie, watch it, it's awful. And that's pretty much the ritual of it.
A friend of mine hosts a bad movie night every Saturday online.
And, nice.
It's on a site called Carousel, something like that. Caracal. I don't know how you pronounce it. So she just sends a link, and then we can all jump in. And there's a live chat on the side, and we sort of do the Mystery Science Theater thing, where we're watching this horrible movie and commenting along. And
oh, that sounds like fun.
It's a lot of fun. It's not always bad movies. We actually watched on New Year's Eve, we watched Die Hard.
Okay.
Because I assume my friend got this information online, but she timed it so that she's in Colorado at exactly midnight her time. Hans Gruber fell from the Nakatomi Plaza.
Nicely done.
So occasionally there's a movie like that because everybody just wants to see it. But like this past Saturday, we watched Monster Island.
Okay.
It was one of those asylum films.
Yes.
There was one a few weeks ago that was some sort of werewolf movie where the werewolves were literally just someone with a werewolf mask, like you'd buy at Walmart. I believe they had werewolf paws, and then they were just painted black. Their body, their arms, legs, everything was just painted black.
Oh no!
And it was so bad. But we entertain ourselves.
See, that's what I used to when I first got out of college. I had this group of friends. They were great. They were the kind of people where I could call them up and be, just sit, what are you doing right now? And they would drop what they were doing and come over and do whatever crazy scheme that I had come up with. And so we used to have wine and cheese parties. We'd have the wine because sometimes that was the only way to get through some of these movies. And then the cheesiest movie that we could find. And I would subject them to whatever this movie was, and we would just drink it and watch it and make fun of it. And it was fun. Like, we enjoyed wine and cheese night. There is a certain, I don't know, a certain, I guess it's maybe more fun if it's a group activity, which is probably why I end up texting Summer and Matt while I'm watching it, because these kind of really bad movies, they are more fun, I think, if you're watching them with a group, because there's that sort of group sense of humor, that I think these movies are made for. They're made for that kind of viewing experience, I think.
Oh, sure. Well, hell, decades and decades ago, when I went into the service, my going away party wasn't really a party. I just got my closest friends together. We got snacks and things to drink and watched Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Nice.
And just hung out.
That sounds perfect. The perfect send-off.
All righty. Excuse me just a moment. Got to keep myself moist in the throat. The air's a little dry in here. All right. We're going to switch gears because I was looking at your webpage and a question just hit me. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this.
Okay.
I don't want the government swooping down on us. But how does one get invited to speak at the CIA? And then what does one talk about?
Well, all right, let me see what I can say, what I'm allowed to say. It was something that apparently the CIA encourages their agents to have extracurricular activities. So they have a writing club.
Wait, you're not allowed to say that.
Uh-oh.
Damn it. The man has come in trying to keep us down.
Agent Keen on the case. And originally a former agent, I don't believe he's a CIA agent anymore there. He had reached out to Brian and Jesus Gonzalez and a couple of other writers to come talk to their writers club. And while they were there, they I guess they sort of brainstormed about different horror scenarios and things like that. And it was a very, I think, valuable experience on both sides, because you got to see kind of the inner workings of a government agency, and they got to indulge in a thing that I think when you're in an agency like the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, there's an immense amount of pressure behind the scenes that the general public doesn't know. That's my impression. I'm just nobody send the black helicopters after me. It's just my impression is that these are very high stress jobs. Yes. And I really like that the CIA embraces the creative outlets that agents have in order to sort of deal with and process some of the things, I guess, that they must, see and experience all the time. So they had done, my understanding is Brian had done this maybe 2 or 3 times. And then this liaison had reached out and said, well, we'd like to have women writers come talk to the CIA. And we were, wondering if Mary would like to go. And then they, mentioned a couple other women writers that, like the little group of us were going to go as a caravan. And I was delighted. Because one of my other interests is crime, criminal profiling, things like that, how that kind of crime works. And I thought, well, this is kind of nice. I've admired people in these kinds of jobs. It's nice to be able to do something where I can give back to them. So I know they had to do a background check on me. I had to be able to pass certain security clearances, which sounded super cool to me, but apparently is a fairly common thing, but it just sounded really cool. Like, I have whatever the lowest security clearance is, but I have it. So they did that. They checked, and then there's a lot of protocols going into the place. Like, we went in the wrong entrance, and we were greeted by a man with a gun that I swear to God was as long as he was. I've never seen a gun that big, and that's not even a euphemism. I've never seen a gun that big in my life. It was huge, and he politely told us we had gone in the wrong way. So we backed out, and we went back through, to the other entrance, and we got a little tour of the place. Now that I know I'm not allowed to talk about because it's a security issue, but we got a tour of the place, all the different cool things that they have in the building itself. And we got a little bit of the history of different aspects of the place, like CIA technology and, where agents are stationed most of the time now, and what the kind of jobs they do. It's because I'm not going to lie. I asked this, is it kind of like a James Bond kind of thing? And it's more like, people going to, ambassador type positions and things like that. So it was really cool. We got to see the grounds where they have it was really neat. It was to see the place itself. They have a gift shop, so I got a mug. It was fun. It was nice, and there's little interesting things, like they told us we had to go through a metal detector when we got in, and they confiscated our stuff. No phones, no purses, nothing. We left it all at the front door, and all the agents that we spoke to had their ID tags flipped over, and we weren't supposed to ask their names. And we were told that if they had a tag flipped over, it was because they worked in some type of sensitive position in the CIA. And it was just little things like that I thought it was kind of neat, and we talked, and they were the most engaged, studious group of people. Like, they put us in a conference room, and all the people in the club were there, and they had their pens ready and their notebooks, and they're taking notes as we're talking and asking questions. And part of me was thinking, like, I want to sit down and ask you guys questions. What you do is way more important than what I do. But it was fun. We talked about getting into writing and selling short stories and things like that, and the nature of horror, which was kind of cool. And it was a really fantastic experience. It was kind of like one of those like once in a lifetime sort of things. And I was more than glad. I was honored to do it. I have a lot of respect for the people who keep our country safe, especially dealing with things that we can't even imagine, on a daily, yearly basis. And it was nice to be able to give back and do something for those people,
Sure.
It
Well,
was fun.
it sounds like an amazing experience. And excuse me. I love the realistic look at that sort of thing. Like Alma Katsu's Red Widow.
Mm-hmm.
Was really fascinating. And I don't know how accurate Greg Rucka's stuff is, but he did Queen and Country with MI6, 5, whichever one it is. And it's not that James Bond stuff. It's
right.
The day-to-day.
Yeah.
More realistic. Of course, it's heightened for entertainment value, but I think, I assume, more accurate than what most people think of when they think, ooh, spy movies and CIA and
right
that kind of thing.
It was interesting because I could tell, we were bustling with questions, and I could tell where he was diplomatically filtering out what he could and couldn't say to us. And he did make it sound very much like an office job, that for most people, you go in, you do your job at your cubicle, and you go home, and I'm okay with that. It doesn't rub off any of the shiny of the mystique of crime fighting to me, because I think a lot of it nowadays is probably done on computers, through computers. There's probably a lot. I mean, I know in regular law enforcement, there's a lot of legwork that involves research and going through this and basically going down lists and pouring through a lot of information. And I would imagine it's probably the same, probably even more so on a international scale like that. So it was fascinating, though. They really, it was cool.
All right. Well, hopefully neither one of us will get red flagged. All right. Before we move on to our main event, just a couple more things. I wanted to ask about Redbubble and how that sort of came about, how that works for you. I was looking it over. I had in mind getting the Hollower t-shirt, but then I saw the 4Emmy, which is fantastic.
That's the new cover. I like it. I like it a lot.
I love that cover. So now I have, well, I was going to say I have a choice to make, or I could just splurge.
I'm okay with you splurging.
Although, frankly, the 4Emmy, I might forego the t-shirt and get a poster.
I was really lucky there. Crossroads Press, a lot of the things that the rights had reverted back to me, I've been reissuing through Crossroads Press, and they do a beautiful job. I had sold the Italian rights previously to a couple of the Hollower books for Emmy, and like one or two other things, The Fading Place, and the Italian covers were just gorgeous, because the Italian covers they reminded me a lot of that Zebra Books period of time, where those really cool horror covers that were not over the top, but they were genuinely creepy looking covers, and they they made good use of color, and they really sort of embraced the fact that they were horror novels. The Italian covers to me do that. They still embrace that very vivid, um, eerily beautiful, but still somewhat disturbing look. And I'm not sure if that was an inspiration for Crossroads or not, but that's how the new Feremi cover comes across to me. And to be honest, Brian handles most of the Redbubble stuff. But I know that he was taken with that particular cover more so than the previous editions. And that he said that's the one. That's the one people are gonna like. So I said, all right, let's go with that one then.
And they do have it. I was on there the other day going through the different subcategories and stuff, and I believe that 4Emmy is under Paperbacks from Hell.
Really? Oh, cool.
Just for that, because it's that style.
Oh, nice. Okay, good.
I think there's only 2 or 3 that they have under. If you click on the, the sub category, I guess it is, Paperbacks from Hell. That one and
cool.
1 or 2 others come up.
Oh, nice. I'm glad.
But yeah, it's a great range of artwork. I love so many of the book covers, but yeah, that one really, really stands out.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was lucky for that one. They did a beautiful job there with that. And that's one of my favorite novellas. The cover, for people.
Cool. Now, I forgot, when I first introduced you, I wanted to show something. Last time we spoke, I had a huge stack of your books, but there was one particular book missing, and I just wanted to show.
Yay!
But I have it now. My Hollower trilogy is complete.
Thank you. Oh, good. Thank you.
To have that.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we're going to move on to our main event. Before we do, I have to do my fake ad. I have no sponsors for this, so I'm trying to lure sponsors in somehow, as if anyone who could sponsor me is going to see this. So I try to find something to promote that ties into what we're talking about.
Okay.
And I was at first going to do a game. There's a game called Mountains of Madness.
Yes.
Which seemed to be the appropriate thing. But when I started watching the movie yesterday, I realized there's a better fake sponsor. So, today's episode of My Favorite Horror With is not sponsored by The Last Book You'll Ever Read from Vault Comics, written by Cullen Bunn.
Oh, nice.
There's these are the first 4 issues. Hopefully there's not too much glare.
Oh no, they look good.
And there's that one. Issue 5 comes out tomorrow as of this recording. It'll probably be issue 6 by the time this goes up. But in The Last Book You'll Ever Read, I have to look at my notes here. There's an author, Olivia Cade. She's written a book called Satyr, and it has inflamed people. It is driving some people crazy. She's had to hire a bodyguard named Connor Wilson to protect her as she goes on her book tour. And the book seems to be having this transformative effect on people. And there's violence and craziness, and her fans are just as bad as the people that are against her. Mm-hmm. And it's just fantastic. Cullen Bunn, very adult horror. There is plenty of gore and nudity and craziness going on. And it's the last book you'll ever read.
That sounds fantastic. It sounds exactly like something I would like.
And obviously you could tell why I made that the choice. So that's my non-sponsor for this episode. And now we're going to jump into the main event. Your choice for this episode of My Favorite Horror With was John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. That's my Scream Factory Collector's Edition cover.
Nice.
Although I could flip it around. They do have the other cover on the other side. I don't know how well that's going to...
Oh, yes, with the book. Yep.
So, is it possible for you to tell us quickly what this movie is about.
Okay. Basic summary here, hopefully without giving away any spoilers, is that John Trent.
Before we do this, I'm sorry, I forgot. Folks, there will be spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie, go and watch it and then come back to this, because we're going to break this movie down. We're going to talk about it. There's going to be spoilers. I apologize for interrupting. Please go ahead.
Okay, even better. So I can include spoilers. Okay, so basically the premise is that Sam Neill's character, John Trent, is an insurance fraud investigator and has been hired by a company that insures the publishing house, Arcane Publishing, who is claiming that they can't produce the newest Sutter Kane novel because Sutter Kane has gone missing. And so they're filing, I guess, they had insured this writer, and they're filing a claim to be paid because they can't find him anywhere. And so John Trent is hired to basically find out what happened to Sutter Kane. Now, Sutter Kane is, he's compared to Stephen King in the movie, but this movie is a clear homage to H.P. Lovecraft. It is cosmic horror. It is definitely a cosmic horror movie, and it is definitely Lovecraftian in many, many ways. And Sutter Kane has the kind of effect that I would say he's got maybe the fame and fortune of Stephen King, but the cult following of H.P. Lovecraft, but to like the nth degree, where reading his novels have anything from people having, paranoid reactions and headaches and dizziness to full-on homicidal tendencies. It's driving people insane. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg, because when John Trent goes to look for Sutter Kane in the fictitious town that Sutter Kane talks about, he finds him, and he finds this town, and he didn't think he was going to. And you get to the heart of what is really happening and what Sutter Kane has really unleashed on the world. And it's just, it came out in 1994. I've heard people criticize the special effects, particularly the monster special effects, but this movie has some of the most genuinely chilling scenes, I think. And to me, it perfectly captures what people like about cosmic horror. And honestly, because it's John Carpenter, I mean, there's some social commentary there that it probably took me years really to realize, is that what he's saying, I think, is that there's a kind of fanaticism attached to fandom that really makes people's belief in, their faith in, their love for and devotion to the things they are fans of even more powerful in some cases than religion. And having seen, honestly, what fanaticism toward religion has done over the course of mankind's history, it's a little bit scary to see what people will do with stuff that we know is clearly fictitious. So I think that's one of the messages of it, that it doesn't beat you over the head with it, because it at its center, it's just a fun, very creepy cosmic horror story, but it's there. And I think it's an extra layer of scary that people can be so slavishly devoted to something that they could kill for it.
I wonder, with you having said that, I wonder what this movie would be like if it were made today in the modern era with social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we see constantly the toxic fandom on social media, which they didn't have, of course, back then.
I would say, if anything, the infection of this, the effect of these books would just happen faster, because I think, like you said, that the fact that there was not social media, and that primarily reading was still, one of the top hobbies that people had. I think that one of the characters points out, well, what if people don't read? Then how is it going to spread to people who don't read? He said, well, there's a movie. They're making a movie, and I think now there'd be YouTube clips, and there'd be internet chat rooms about it. There'd be Twitter trending topics of Sutter Kane's new book, and really, I think it would just descend. We would descend into madness even faster. So it's almost, I mean, in a way, I think it would be even more deadly now for something like that to happen. For them to remake it now, I think it would happen much faster.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of toxic fandom, here's a little tie-in, because I'm a Star Wars fan, but there is some toxicity in that fandom. This movie is the feature film debut of Hayden Christensen.
Yes.
Which I did not know. I just happened to pause the end credits when his name was dead center on my TV. I was like, what the?
Yes, he's the little boy.
The little paper boy at the end.
Yeah, he's the little boy near the end. One of the little known facts about that. Yes, I believe that was his first role. Yeah.
On IMDb, it does have him listed in a couple TV series before that.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't say what his role is. Could have just been an extra or something.
Right.
But absolutely his first movie. Which, yeah, that kind of blew me away. And this makes me think of Ringu, the novel, and the sequel. There's 3 books. I've only read the first 2, but of course, in Ring or Ringu, the curse is being spread through a videotape. And in the second one, I believe they make a movie of the events of the first one, and that's how it starts spreading. And so it becomes a global thing. Similar to this.
Right. And there's an aspect, I think, of cosmic horror in general, which requires some type of, with Lovecraft, the horror of it was always that absolute destruction of mankind. We're always just on the cusp of it. And then, like, the stars move out of line, or somebody comes in with an ancient spell, or somebody kills somebody or screws something up that just narrowly causes us to miss absolute and total annihilation. But the horror of Lovecraft's work is that we came that close. It's that easy to screw it up, but it's also that easy to bring us to the brink of utter destruction. With this movie, though, it takes it a step further. We're already in decline.
Yes.
This has already happened by the beginning of the movie, and all of this mostly is just, it's told in a flashback. And I think it's anything like that would require a vehicle to spread that kind of sickness, that kind of infection, whatever we want to call it, to as wide a group as possible, because that's the nature of cosmic horror, is that it's so grand in scale that it's really more than any one person. It's more than just, say, one person seeing the videotape. It's the fact that it can be so easily and pervasively passed along because of human curiosity. I mean, how many times has there been that not safe for work, just those 4 letters, NSFW. You see something on there and you're like, oh, I got to click that. It's the same with videos, where it's like, you don't want to see this because it's forbidden. Don't look at it now. Don't look at it. And then you go and look at it. And I think that a lot of, I think that's really, what Carpenter's getting at in this movie, is that with as much drawn into these things, like Lovecraft's characters, by curiosity, by this pursuit of knowledge that our pride dictates that we prove true or not true one way or the other, but it's driving that need to find out the truth. And finding out the truth is basically what starts the great unraveling of everything else.
Well, that's always been one of my favorite aspects of Lovecraft and the writers that have followed in his footsteps is the forbidden knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Which is one of the reasons Miskatonic is one of my favorite settings.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just, as a voracious reader and someone who has always loved being in school, well, post high school, loved being in college. Yeah, just that search for forbidden knowledge, that thirst for it, has always been an aspect of stories that I love. And even having seen what happens in this movie, I would still love to be able to buy and read all of those Sutter Kane books.
Right. I know. You can find the covers, like the complete book covers, like what do they call them? The cover flats of these books online, like front and back covers, which I always thought was fun. But I was always a little surprised that there was never anybody who tried, I guess maybe the movie wasn't big enough to do it, but who tried to do tie-in novels of these books, I always thought that would be, I would read them too, and they form a modern substitute for the Necronomicon, basically, in terms of a cosmic horror thing. Where, the Necronomicon was a book that you weren't supposed to read. You weren't even supposed to open it, don't even look at it, don't even breathe in its direction. And people did. And that started the problem. With this, it's modern pop culture novels, basically pulp horror novels that
pulp horror novels.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of anything, part of the thing that causes, I guess, something to trend or be popular or whatever is word of mouth, whether it's good word of mouth or bad word of mouth. There have been movies I have seen because people have said, "Oh, that's so bad, you'll hate it." Everybody hates this movie, and vice versa. Everybody loves this movie. You'll probably love it too. And I think that there's a almost like a mythic power in that, if you think about it. I think that's what it taps into, is that the unbridled, uncontrolled, like wildfire type power of word of mouth.
Well, they do say that Sutter Kane sells better than Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how many years before Harry Potter?
Right.
And when they go in the bookstore, there are huge displays with all of his books and coffee mugs and T-shirts and all of the merchandise for Sutter Kane. And I want that.
I know, yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, that was before, because the movie came out in 94, and the fact that they had coffee mugs and mouse pads and posters and things like that was kind of before, like, Barnes and Noble and Borders and whatever had the little coffee shops or the displays where most of the stuff was merchandise, like pop culture merchandise, as opposed to books. It might have been a time where, there was sort of, because I always think of the films, particularly of the early 90s or the mid 90s, as being a kind of turning point in an audience's jadedness. Like, horror movies of the 80s were almost, no matter how horrible they were, 70s and 80s, there was a almost naive approach to the world, to life, that is just sort of inherent through all these movies. I don't know, like I hate to say a more innocent time, because then I sound like that little old lady that talks about when I was a kid, but it's
back
true.
in my day.
Back in my day. But somewhere around the mid-90s, horror movies in particular gained a kind of self-awareness, almost a jadedness about life, about people, about the world. And this movie, I think, was one of them. And because I think it's I think more than just this idea that, oh, people will find religion in anything but religion. It was that it's insidious how pervasive the things that we are fans about can be in life, with mugs and buttons and stickers and, uh, bookmarks even. And I remember thinking that, at the time, like, oh, people do that with books? That's kind of cool. I can get a mug with a book cover on it.
Well, I have my right in front of me, behind you, behind my computer, is my book cart, and it's covered in stickers that I've gotten from publishers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You order directly from Grindhouse or Death's Head Press or whomever, and you get bookmarks bookmarks, stickers,
Stickers, yeah.
postcards, and my book cart is covered with a bunch of stickers and stuff. And I just signed up for the Ghoulish imprint from Perpetual Motion Machine.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And you get it's like a subscription, so you're going to get the 6 or 8 books that they publish, but you also get, I think there's a tote bag,
Oh, nice.
and stickers, and then just a whole bunch of extra stuff, a membership card,
Oh, nice.
just all sorts of cool stuff. And
I I do think that there's and this would be a completely different topic for a different time, but I do like that book publishing, particularly I think with the small press, because the big press used to have the big end caps at the end of shelves and things like that, and the big cardboard cutout kind of things to go around it, but small press is thinking outside the box, especially lately, especially within, like, maybe because of COVID, like the last 2 years or so. They're really thinking outside the box in terms of, merchandise and free swag and things that solidify the idea that a book is more than just a book. It's a package. It's a package deal. It's a story, but it's immersive in other ways, in ways like that, with video games or movies. It's a different kind of immersion. And books, the immersion's mostly in your head, but they're doing these little things to kind of bring that immersion in a more external way. And I think Sutter Kane was really kind of the pioneer for that.
well, I don't know if Max Booth will appreciate me talking about this, because he seems to keep trying to distance himself, but I ordered the Tales from the Crust.
Okay.
And I had the paperback in my cart, and I had a couple other things in my cart, and then I saw the limited edition for Tales from the Crust, and I removed everything else from my cart, because it's a hardback. It is square. It was delivered in a pizza box with a pizza cutter and napkins and a pen.
Oh,
and
that's cool.
might have been some other things. And they did another book. I can't remember the title of it now off the top of my head. Something about a suitcase. And part of the story has to do with the place in France where couples put the locks on the fence.
Okay, yeah, okay.
And so this book, if you ordered the hardback edition of the book, you got a little lock and key. A little heart lock and key came with it, and a couple other things. I think there was a playlist, like a soundtrack playlist, and some other things. And again, this is Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing. They do these really cool little things.
I think that it certainly, I mean, at least for me, it would certainly encourage a kind of brand loyalty, because it like I said, it takes that sort of internal connection to something, because by reading the book, you have that kind of personal connection to the story if you really like it, and makes it something in the sort of outside world. I'm not sure how to put it other than, like, it's almost like it removes it just a tiny bit from being fiction and solidifies it somehow in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that. I provided that it doesn't cause mass hysteria and have the It allows the old ones to come back through. I think it's probably a pretty good marketing idea.
All right, well, let's get back to this particular movie. And now I saw this in the theater when it was new. And apparently John Carpenter says this is part of his Apocalypse trilogy, which is The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness.
Right.
And I can see Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness. They have the same feel to me. The Thing does not feel like these. I can see how they all fit the Apocalypse thing.
Right.
But this has a completely different feel. And the beginning of it is so weird from a horror movie standpoint. The opening credits have this hard rock soundtrack song that just feels kind of felt out of place to me. And then there's jokes at the beginning. When they're hauling John Trent in, and they throw him in the cell, and after he'd kicked one of the orderlies, and he's like, "Sorry about your balls, that was just a lucky shot."
And
then they start playing music, and this is a man in a straitjacket who's been thrown in a padded cell, and his concern is, he's like, "Oh God, not the Carpenters."
There's a little bit, I think, and it varies. There's a little bit of humor in, I would say, more so Carpenter's later stuff. But there's a little bit, there's a little bit of humor in The Thing, there's a little bit in Halloween, although not a whole lot. But for me, In the Mouth of Madness is one of those movies where people either like it or it puts them off because it's very stylized. More so, and I can't even say it's like Carpenter's style, really. I mean, it is. Carpenter's style is there. The music in the beginning, that sort of, rocking credit scene where all the books are being published and stuff, and little things that Carpenter puts throughout the movie. They're Carpenter's, they are his things, but it's almost surreally stylized. Like this opening scene in the hospital. With I'm assuming he's the doctor, the head of the place, Saperstein, right? Where the hospital looks a little bit maybe too clean, too sanitized for a mental institution.
Yeah, it's a very...
Everything is white, everything. It's almost like the waiting room outside of heaven or something. Like it's very, very white, very quiet, very soft, and I think part of that is to emphasize, how shocking the gory stuff is later. But also because you get the impression that this is probably one of the last places standing that hasn't really been touched by whatever's happening outside, except that it has. Even the outside scene of the hospital, it's almost like a matte painting. It almost looks like a matte painting, like the way they show it to you. It's a very surreally stylized movie, which carries both, I think, a beauty which is meant to convey like cosmic horror can have some beautiful stuff in it, some transcendently spiritual, cosmic. The cosmic awe, like the way we look at a nebula and think, oh my God, that's beautiful and sort of terrifying in its scope.
Right.
And I think that in Carpenter's way, that's what some of these scenes that are sort of surreally sterile are supposed to indicate. And then the gore in it is almost like just flashes, because that's kind of how Lovecraft did it. Lovecraft is suggested unspeakable things, but he was almost like too proper a guy to get into details. But his work, if you read between the lines, it had human sacrifices, it had cannibalism, it had necrophilia, it had orgies, it had blood drinking, it had all kinds of unspeakably awful things that he almost couched in this sort of sterile, beautiful prose, and I think that's what I think that's what Carpenter's trying to capture. I think that's why it looks odd like it does, and why certain things come across as being almost jarringly dreamlike in that way. At least that's how I read it, you know?
So much dream stuff going on. But I did want to say, one of the things I like about doing this particular show of mine, two things. One, I get to talk to wonderful creative people, and occasionally Mike Lombardo. But two, I've been introduced to some wonderful movies, and I've had the opportunity to revisit movies that I have not seen in ages. As I said, I saw it in the theater. I enjoyed it, but just watching it yesterday, I had a whole new appreciation for it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if, I assume it's because I'm older. I don't know if I'm more mature, but and it is, there are so many jarring things. John Glover at the beginning as Saperstein is over the top.
Right? He's creepy. He's creepy in his placidity. Is that a word? He's so placid that he's creepy.
And I love John Glover. He's fantastic. Yes. And I had forgotten how many wonderful people were in this. David Warner comes in.
He's excellent.
Always loved him. And then, as you said earlier, it starts with John Trent being brought into the asylum. And then when David Warner comes in, John Trent starts telling his story. And that's the bulk of our movie.
Right. And the thing I like about David Warner being included, there's two things. One, he's one of those actors that both Carpenter uses frequently, and also that people who make Lovecraft adaptations use frequently. Like, he was the main character in Cold Air. And he's good because he has that sort of, that buttoned up intensity. It's in his eyes, it's in his voice, it's in the things that he does with his mouth, that I think is one of the subtleties that people miss about Cosmic Horror all the time, that there's a lot of stuff is just under the surface, whether it's murderous rage or lust or even, somebody holding it together, because whoever David Warner works for in this movie is not 100% clear. You get the impression that he has some type of psychology background, but you also get the impression from little things he says that he might be working for maybe the last group of people trying to fight this and stop it from happening. Because he says that his job, when he talks to Sam Neill, he says his job is to get him out of there. And he wants to know what Sam Neill apparently, because I think, again, and this is a spoiler, because Sam Neill is also a character in this latest Sutter Kane book.
Yes.
I think that he shows up on the radar of whoever these people are that David Warner works for. And we learn very little about David Warner's character, other than that he's looking for a way to stop what's happening. And he's hoping that Sam Neill has the answer. And if he does, he's going to get Sam Neill out of there so he can stop this. And what he comes to find out, I think one of the horrible things about it is that Sam Neill doesn't have the answers he's looking for. He's got answers. He's got a hell of a lot of crazy answers.
Yes.
But they're not how to stop this. They're basically just, Sam Neill has resigned himself to the fact that this is the end. This is how it goes. This is how myths happen. Not the creation of the old one myths, but the memory of the human race as a myth. He says at one point that will just be a bedtime story for their children, nothing more.
Right.
Just a myth.
Well,
and that's very Cosmic Horror right there.
Well, I like it's very subtle at the beginning when David Warner shows up and he's talking to John Glover's character. I think it's John Glover that says, how is it out there?
Yes.
And we have no idea what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Could be anything. Could be a snowstorm. We don't know.
Yep.
We'll find out.
And Sam Neill does the same thing. because once David Warner starts asking questions, Sam Neill looks at him and he says, things are turning to shit out there, aren't they? And David Warner changes the subject. He says, let's talk about you. And he completely changes the subject. And so this is how we get into Sam Neill going back. Now, even the first of the flashbacks. So Sam Neill starts his story, right? And the first of his flashbacks is almost done like, in my opinion, like one of those 40s noir things, like, this dishy dame walked into my office. And
that's exactly what I was going to say. All of a sudden, we're watching a noir.
Mm-hmm. It's got that sort of music, the lights, the fact that it's very hot, the fact that he's
that guy's just sweating his ass off.
Peter Jason, who's also a fantastic actor, and also appears in a lot of Carpenter's. In fact, it appears, I believe, in Prince of Darkness as well.
He's in Prince of Darkness,
yeah. And he has this. It basically, Sam Neill is showing off. Yes. He has proof that Peter Jason's character is committing fraud, and he's just sort of swaggering. Sam Neill sort of swaggered around the office, showing off his skills, and it's a very it's that weird stylized noirish kind of thing that is meant to establish, I think, really who Sam Neill is.
Yeah,
which is not a terribly nice person, He's
very cocky.
He is, and I would say what I thought was fascinating is most of Lovecraft's main characters, they're not suave, they're not cool, they're not confident. They're, I guess, kind of Mary Sue's of Lovecraft. They're very, very smart, but very socially awkward. And what Carpenter does in this, and I think it's kind of fascinating, is he creates a character who is very, very smart, very good at his job, but has so little faith and trust in the human race that he is just as socially awkward, although in a different way. He's not unconfident, he's overconfident, to the point of kind of coming across like an asshole sometimes.
And at one point.
Yeah. And he's, sometimes he's funny about it, but yeah, he kind of comes across like a jerk. And even in the subsequent scene where John Trent's boss has taken him out to lunch, and this scene is one of my favorites, so I'm sure that's going to be, we're going to talk about that too. But the boss, Robbie, is trying to get him to work for him full time, to join his staff and just basically sniff out all of these frauds all over the place for this one company. And John Trent refuses. He says, I'm my own man. Nobody pulls my strings. And there is a reason for that later on. But I think it establishes that, like any good Lovecraftian story, our hero does not have a good support network. There's not a lot of people around here who would say, John Trent, now that guy, he's aces. We like him. He doesn't have friends. He has Robbie. He has a boss.
We never see him with anyone that isn't work-related.
Exactly. He lives alone. His apartment or house, it's not even very clear because we only see like one or two rooms of the place, is very utilitarian. It's comfy. He clearly makes a lot of money. He's got a nice, expensive couch.
I was looking at that couch. I was like, ooh, I wish I was sitting in that couch right now.
Right? But there's no pictures. There's no photographs of anybody. This is a loner, just like any of Lovecraft's people. Any of the people that he creates, this is a loner who doesn't really trust people.
Excuse me. So you mentioned the scene when they're having lunch, I assume it is. And yeah, very creepy scene.
It's one of my favorites.
And it's so well shot. I mean, this is one of those, you could show someone this, and this is why John Carpenter's a master.
Yes. This is and this was actually not that I want to date myself, let's say, but this movie came out when I was in high school, and it was around the time I decided that I wanted to be a writer. And John Carpenter was an incredibly big influence on me, from The Thing, Halloween, and this movie. And it was for folks to summarize the scene. Basically, all of the horrific things that are happening happen in the background because we've got Robbie and John Trent sitting in a booth. You know, it's perfectly framed. They're in a booth in a diner in front of a big picture window, a big open window. And behind them across the street, you start to see people running and screaming, getting out of the way. And then this man emerges from the building across the street. And he looks like hell. I mean, he looks ill. He looks genuinely sick. His clothes are askew. There's clearly something wrong with his face, although you're not quite sure what. I mean, it's just, there's something very, very wrong here. And it's still in the background. You know, like Cosmic Horror would say, it's in the background.
And he's carrying an axe.
He's carrying an axe. And he crosses the street, and as he's crossing the street, he's kicking things over. He's just creating havoc in this trail headed straight for the window. And then he breaks the window, he shatters the window. And that moment of things moving from background to foreground, you know, where the cosmic horror is actually impeding, it's actually invading normal life.
Right.
Is this moment.
And we have that quick close-up of his eyes.
Yes.
With the double pupils.
Yes.
Very quick, very subtle, very creepy.
And he only says one thing to John Trent. He leans over, he's crouching down, and he asks him if you read Sutter Kane.
You read Sutter Kane.
And then he tries to kill him. He raises the axe, and of course he's shot by police because by this time he's created enough of a ruckus that somebody somewhere has called police. And this is when things in this flashback are still normal enough that the police would come and help. And it's just a brilliantly done. It's the first scene, like you said, that establishes the mastery of this movie for creating this sort of growing sense of dread. And there's maybe this is my favorite movie, so I love the whole thing. But there's like maybe 3 or 4 scenes throughout the movie that just keep ramping it up, that are just so oddly shocking and horrific, not so much for what you're showing, but what it implies. That but this one is the first of those, I think.
The way you described that, I realized this is something they do on Family Guy quite often, where they'll have the foreground will just be characters talking, and the joke is going on in the background.
Yes. And that's, I mean, it goes to show that really the opposite to me of horror is comedy, because it's the same kinds of setups, the same structures, sometimes even the same situation. But which way you tilt the perspective lens determines whether it's horror or comedy. But you're right, Family Guy does that all the time. And I think that's why it's funny, because we can't help but, you know, divide our attention between what we're supposed to be viewing and what is kind of distracting us in the background.
Right. Because normally in a normal movie, you're watching the two guys having a conversation. These are our characters. This is what we're supposed to be focused on. But back there is what is really important.
Yes. And they do that very well in this movie. It's I think one of the most effective scenes in the movie.
And I love the fact that when Trent goes to talk to the publisher, played by Charles Heston.
Yes.
And the Sutter Kane's agent comes up. And I forget exactly what Trent says. And Charlton Heston's like, "Oh, you've met his agent?" Like, "I did." He's like, "Yeah, he was the guy with the axe."
Yes. And of course, you know, to confirm the fact that John Trent really has no sense of reading the room, he goes, "Well, you'd think somebody that outsells Stephen King could afford better representation."
Yeah.
Ooh, too soon.
And then about 30 seconds later, he's very, very much too close to Linda Stiles.
Yes. Well, that's the other thing that I noticed too. Even then, okay, now I know that hairstyles have wildly changed from the time I was a wee itty bitty child to now, but there is something, if you look at the women in this movie, in this scene, where he goes, because basically Robbie had hired him to investigate this claim, so he goes to Arcane Publishing, and all the women interacts with, including Linda Stiles, who is Sutter Kane's editor, have a weird, almost 1940s hairstyle, which seems out of place given that this is a modern 1994 movie. It's taking place in the present, whatever that present is. But again, it's that weird, surreal, timeless kind of thing that I guess, the indication is that it could happen tomorrow,
Right.
that whatever this is taking place, it's taking place tomorrow. But it's, again, that weird, stylized, everybody is hushed voices, like nobody, not that it's solemn there. Everybody's incredibly efficient, incredibly busy, but they have that sort of look like they're almost people without a time. It's not even like they're out of place, out of time. It's like there is no time period that applies to them, really.
Right.
And I think that's kind of eerie too. And Carpenter does a lot of little things throughout the movie like that kind of keep you off kilter, so that when these weird things happen, you have no time to recover. You have nothing in this movie other than John Trent to rely on as a stable, normal part of the reality that you know.
For the most part.
And I think that's kind of cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, so many little things. So, I mean, it's a masterfully told story.
Yes.
And I'm sure there are so many things I did not get on previous viewings.
To be honest, I've seen this movie numerous times, and I keep picking up these little things every time. There's something little in there every time, which I think is good. You want a movie that I think the movies that we consider favorites are the ones that hold up like that. The ones where over time we're like, oh, I didn't notice that the last time. So basically, they agree, the three of them. Linda Stiles, who clearly is not a fan of John Trent in the beginning, because John Trent comes across as a little bit lecherous, the way he looks at her, the way, the kind of things he says to her, the fact that he's a smoker, little things like that.
She escorts him to the elevator, he is in her space, leaning against the wall.
Yeah.
Essentially trapping. He doesn't have both hands around her, so she's not literally trapped, but he is
definitely invading her space, which again, even for the times, he's invasive. He doesn't understand the social cue that she does not want him near her, that he has not made a good impression on her. But they basically agree that Trent and Linda Stiles are going to go figure out what happened. But this takes time. So the first suggestion that she has, because he basically criticizes her job. So not only is he kind of putting her off, making her uncomfortable by hitting on her, he's also criticizing her job because he thinks of horror as pulpy crap that is basically just allowing the human race to flush their brains down the toilet. And so she says, well, why don't you read some? And because he is good at his job, he does. That's the scene where another kind of eerie scene. And again, it's little things. Carpenter starts off little and he builds, and there's so we've got John Trent in the bookstore, and he's picking up all these Sutter Kane novels, and he's looking at them with a somewhat critical eye, because they do have, in fact, hold that thought, they do have those kind of pulpy covers. I am this much of a nerd, yes, and I embrace my nerdidity. They have these kind of pulpy covers. I don't know if you can see them.
Yeah. Oh, I want that. I want
the thing in the basement.
So beautiful.
I printed these off the internet because I just wanted to have them. The Feeding. These are Sutter Kane's novels. The Breathing Tunnel. We've got The Whisperer of the Dark, which is, I mean, you can't get much more Lovecraftian a title than that. Haunter Out of Time, same idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one that I believe is the last book Sutter Kane turned in, which was Hobbs End Horror. And I don't know if you can see like the kind of detailed artwork here that they did, but they really did some horror pulp covers that, like we were talking about earlier in the show, that sort of, 80s we're embracing the fact that this is a horror novel, and we're going to use horror novel covers, and we're going to use horror novel imagery, and we're going to make sure that people know that this is a spooky book.
I would plaster those covers on my walls.
Right. I kind of would like to have sort of a like a collage of like all the covers, all the in like a little poster to put somewhere. But
Absolutely.
So our hero John Trent, he picks up these books, right, and he comes across another reader. Now, even then, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, during that scene when he first comes into the bookstore, he has to step over a knocked over display.
There are
right?
these, for lack of a better term, riots going on at bookstores.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's one of those things that's almost relegated to the background. You can see people shoving each other. You can see a sort of latent hostility in the other people in the bookstore, looking at the Sutter Kane books. And this sickly looking individual who's got, I think, like a bloody nose, and he's got some open wounds on his face, and I think he's got those same eyes. He gives John Trent this sort of cryptic message. He sees you. And of course, John Trent, in his way, he's like, well, tell him I said hi.
Yeah.
Somebody who's used to dealing with crazies, not in a very, very diplomatic way, But yeah, and he picks up these books and he reads them, and admits even that the books they're unsettling, that they're basically pulp horror. They're stories about people turning into monsters, things like that, creepy things in the closet. He sort of minimizes the actual plots, but
doesn't he say that they're better written than he expected?
Yes. They're better, because I think that a lot of, especially then, and you could say it's after the horror implosion, or I guess toward the end of the horror implosion, where so much of the market was glutted with substandard horror coming out in the 80s and early 90s and stuff like that, that I think a lot of horror in general was relegated in people's minds to being pulp crap. And it really did a disservice to, say, people like Lovecraft or Stephen King or any of those people out there who were making genuinely disturbing, creepy books about these about basically about the human condition and about the non-human condition. And so he's surprised that they're written as well as they are. And this leads to a nightmare sequence, because he's so tired. He's staying up clearly night after night reading these books, which I think a lot of horror fans, even if you're a fan of horror, if you're up night after night reading these disturbing things, and you get the impression that the books have a kind of subtlety to them, it's not a ham-fisted horror. It's a thing that gets under your skin. It gets into your brain, and it festers there. It grows there. That's the initial element of the infection. And at first, when I saw the movie, I admit I was a little confused by the fact that there are scenes in this movie which seem to repeat. But what you come to, and the dream sequence is one of them, because the dream sequence plays out in real life later on in the movie, but differently. Because in the dream sequence, it's a lot more violent. And I think this establishes two things. One, cosmic horror, dreams are always a message of things that are going to come.
Well, isn't the first time he sees the cop beating the guy in the alley, that's real?
Okay, yeah, so maybe there's a dream after that. Yes,
I'm sorry. I think after he bought the books, and he's walking through.
Yes.
And he sees the
posters.
Big posters for Hobbs End Horror.
For Hobbs End Horror.
And a very little bit of subtle foreshadowing. He peels back. A little bit of one of those posters is loose, and he peels it back just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
and then he sees the cop. And the thing that I noticed when he first sees the cop beating the graffiti artist, there are a bunch of people in the alley.
Yes. Yes.
But then in the dream, it's just the cop, at least in the first iteration of the dream. It's just the cop and the person being beaten by the cop.
Yes.
And there is nobody else there.
Yes, and those are little subtleties like that. The fact that in real life, you've got a cop who, when he turns around, clearly looks unwell too. But, and to put it in perspective, I know that, not that I want to open this political can of worms, I know there's always been a level of police brutality, but it wasn't as publicly common or publicly known, perhaps, I guess, at the time when this movie was made. So there's something sort of horrific about the people that you would call to help you in this situation being the ones doing the beating. And you're right, there are a lot of little things, like he's ostensibly beating this man for spray painting graffiti. He spray painted the letter I, the letter C, and the letter A.
Right.
And then later on, when he dreams it, he dreams, I believe it's in one of the iterations of the dream, ICANSEE.
Right.
You know, so he's dreaming more of it. And they never make it 100% clear, but I think one of the reasons he dreams this is because something he's reading seems somehow connected to the scene. It must have been something where while he was reading the scene, he fell asleep, and it moves fairly seamlessly from waking to sleep to still being asleep to waking up. So he has almost like a nightmare inside a nightmare.
Right. It's the whole, he's had the nightmare, he wakes up, but he's actually still in a nightmare and wakes up again.
Mm-hmm. And what we see in this scene, in the dream sequence, is that at first he is alone in the alley with the cop and this person being beaten. And for some reason, that's almost more disturbing than in real life when there were other people. Even though the other people in the alley were doing nothing to stop this act of violence from happening, there is some anonymity in a crowd, maybe, or some protection from a crowd. And in the dream sequence, he's alone, you know? And throughout the movie, they keep saying things to him like that. Like one character says to him, like, you're alone. You know, there's a scene where Linda Stiles in the car says, you know, I think it would be really, you know, scary to be the last one left, you know, to be alone in the world and find out that you're literally the last one left that's sane, you know? So there's a lot of this sense of being alone, meaning that it's almost hopeless by that point, you know, which I think is scary. It's scary for people, you know, and of course is the scene with the agent in the dream, is that at that point or is that later? Where the crowd surrounds the agent?
I think is that the second iteration of the dream?
That might be the second iteration.
He sees the cop beating the guy, and when the cop turns toward him, he's really, really disfigured.
Yes.
He says, do you want some of this, or whatever it is
that
he said in the real world?
Right.
I think he wakes up.
And the cop is next to him.
And the cop's next to him, and then he's back in the alley, and the cop's beating the guy, turns to him, says, do you want some of this? And he turns. We see the agent and these other people come up behind him.
Right.
And he turns around to walk away and sees all of them. So I think it's, like the second, third, whatever level layer of the dream it is.
Right. Because again, in cosmic horror, dreams are messages. And what we see in that final iteration of the dream is that the agent repeats what the guy in the bookstore says to him. He says, he sees you. He sees you. And the agent who tried to kill John Trent, we come to find, was really trying to save the world in a way. And so all of the bad guys, some of whom are actual characters throughout the rest of the movie, some of whom only appear in paintings in the movie, which I didn't notice until the last time I watched this.
Painting.
Yes, there's a woman with kind of one eye, and she's actually a figure in a painting that he sees later on. But anyway, all of these people descend on this poor agent and chop him to bits and pieces. And while this is happening, all you see are the axes flying up and down. You see blood splattering. You see little pieces of flesh flying, and you see this very rapid, almost eye blink series of images, which sort of move both forward and backward in time. And it sort of serves, because I really feel, and not a lot of movies do this, some of them do, that rapid series of images, your brain only recognizes them enough to know that there's something wrong, right. but they're not shown to you long enough for your eye to communicate to your brain like that there's nothing, that this is not something to be alarmed at. It's almost like a series of alarms or red flags going off, yes, that you never have time to process one of them to the point where you can come down from that adrenaline. You know, it's just a series of horrible things all at once, and you're just sort of left like almost like dumbfounded, like staggering at the thought of all of these horrific images that are now in your brain that you have no context for and no way to process. And this happens several times in the movie, because this is, you get the impression, the nature of messages from elder gods or ancient beings to humanity. That's how they come through, and they're horrific. Whatever they mean, they're horrific. And then we get to the road trip.
Yes. Yeah, and I love the idea that the map that he has to, he cuts up the book covers because of the red lines.
Yeah, so I don't know if folks can see it, but if you look close, yep, there are red lines on all of the book covers. Right? And John Trent figures out that if you cut out just those pieces, you can put together a map. A map of, I believe it's Vermont, right?
Yeah, somewhere.
New Hampshire. I'm sorry. I think it's New Hampshire. It's New Hampshire. I'm pretty sure it's New Hampshire. And there's one of them that has a little star. You can't see it, I don't think, in the versions I printed out from the computer. But one of them has a little star, and that star is supposed to indicate, yeah, you can't see it on any of the printouts I did. The star is supposed to indicate the town of Hobbs End.
Right.
Which is his Castle Rock, his Sutter Kane's version of Arkham, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not a place that exists in the real world. And the publisher points this out to John Trent, like, you know, but it's a fictitious place. And John Trent said, well, I have a theory. I have a theory that it may not exist on any new maps, but on old maps, it's probably some little forgotten town in the middle of nowhere, and it just happens to overlap, you know, that it's some, and that's where I think he is. And again, he pretty much flat out accuses them of lying to him, and of trying to file a fraudulent claim, almost goading them into paying for this trip out to New Hampshire to see if this place exists and to see if Sutter Kane is there, because even then he doesn't trust people. He thinks this is total bullshit. You people are bullshitting me. This is some kind of contest or something, right? You know,
Ocean.
And promotional thing, marketing thing you've got going on, and I think it's bullshit. And they swear it isn't, and so they decide to send him and Linda Stiles on a road trip. And the road trip, what I find fascinating about the road trip, and I don't know if you notice this, but like when John Trent is driving, things are pretty normal. Mm-hmm. They do a lot of interesting things with night and daytime in this movie. When John Trent's driving, it's daytime. It's sunny out, you know, he's got good weather. He's cruising through the roads past cornfields. He's cracking, she falls asleep and he like honks in her ear. Yep. You know, he's basically annoying her. But they're having, pleasant enough conversation. I think there's one scene where he's driving at night because they're discussing whether or not she likes working on Sutter Kane's books and why, what it is about his books that she enjoys. And she basically, posits this theory that she said, reality is only what we tell each other it is. Mm-hmm. It's only what the majority says it is. Sanity is only what the majority says it is. And she says, right now, reality shares your point of view. She says, what scares me is the idea that reality might share his point of view, that it could switch, and that could become the majority. That could become the sane. And it's a horrible sanity. It's a horrible reality that we would then find ourselves in. And if you were one of those people basically trying to, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you're one of those people trying to cling to that last hope of reality the way you see it, it would be very lonely. You'd be alone. And he, for the first time and several times throughout the movie, reiterates what reality is, the difference between reality and fiction. That what Sutter Kane writes is fiction, and what he is living is reality. And that there is a sharp and uncrossable divide between reality and fiction. And one of the things I've always loved about cosmic horror is that it often theorizes that there is no such divide, that reality is fluid and is subject to the beholder, and that everything is subject to change. Your bodies, your souls, your minds, the world around you, everything with the right influence and the right powers is fluid and changeable. And sometimes the direction it flows in is horrific.
Yes.
And that's kind of the basic idea throughout the rest of this going forward.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite things about cosmic horror as well.
Yeah, I like how they do it. I like how they show, again, these sort of surreal moments on this road trip.
Well,
where
one of the more famous ones. Uh-oh, have we lost you?
Are you thinking of the bike?
There we go. Yes.
The guy on the bike? Yes. Okay, so there's a scene where, and again, it's something. It is one of those things he does. We were just talking about how in that rapid fire of images that doesn't give you time to process anything, but is clearly horrific, is one approach to putting somebody to scaring someone, to putting them in that sort of frame of mind and building the tension. But he uses another technique in these scenes. These are mostly scenes where Linda Stiles is driving, and they're mostly at night. And the first one is that she's driving along, and it's a country road. You get the impression that it's a country road that is so dark that and only the headlights see. You are literally alone. You could be alone in the ocean. You could be alone in outer space. You are really given a sense of the finite ability of the human race to view their surroundings, their limited surroundings, when there's so much more out there that you can't see, so much more lurking in the dark. And they show this almost like literally by the scene. She's driving in the dark, and out of the dark, coming up on the side, she's got this teenager on a bike, and he's wearing a very distinctively denim jacket and jeans, and he's got a baseball card in his spokes. I don't know if kids still do that on their bikes now, but they did then, and it makes that sort of clack, 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 clack sound, and he's pedaling like hell, from the dark back into the dark. And she thinks it's odd, and it takes a moment to realize why it is so odd. It's odd because he'd have no way of seeing anything, right, other than the car's headlights or taillights or whatever, but he'd have no way of seeing where he's going. So where did he come from? Why is he out there, and where is he going? you know? And it's just odd enough that she's pondering this, and she goes to check, I think the map or something. She goes to check something on the dashboard, and when she looks up again, she hits somebody with her car.
There's something in between.
Okay.
Which is, she sees, what I like is, yes, it's very black.
Mm-hmm.
We see the line in the middle of the road, and then
yes.
way in the background, I guess, we see the reflectors on the pedals of the bike. That's the first thing we see. And
yes.
we don't know what it is.
Yes.
So she does see this teenage boy ride by. And then we're back to just the black road, the line in the middle. We see the reflectors again. We hear the clacking of the cards in the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
This time, same distinctive outfit, but it's an old man.
That you're right. There is yes. It is an old man wearing the same outfit with the same bike and the same cars. And I believe he rides back the other way, doesn't he? He rides back away from them.
I think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it's one of those little details. I think I could be wrong about it, but I'm pretty sure he's running the other way.
She might see the reflectors on the pedals in the rearview mirror as he's coming up from behind the car.
Okay, maybe, yeah, because I know at one point she figures that it's odd enough, but again, these people, they think these things odd, but they don't like it's clearly disturbing to her, and you get the impression, I think they do this because they want to establish that what John thinks is happening and what Linda comes to think are happening are two different things. So mm-hmm. It's not like she's pulling the wool over his eyes, because the worst of these things seems to be happening to her. These sort of weird, terrifying experiences. And we get just enough time to sort of put these people almost, put it away. Okay, we saw this weird thing. We don't know what's going on. We don't know why these weird people are riding around in the dark. But cosmic horror plays with time and space.
Mm-hmm.
And we are allowed enough time to make a connection, like you said, that this guy's wearing the same outfit, but there's an old man on the bike now, wearing the same outfit, the same bike, everything. And it's disturbing, because I think sometimes when you're lost or you're in the dark, you almost feel like, oh my God, I've been out here forever.
Yes.
And then she hits someone with her car.
Then she looks at the map, and then she looks up, boom.
And he goes, tumbling over her windshield, and so she skips to a stop. Now we've got at least a little bit of moonlight. Okay. It's not pitch black. She can see the road. She can see that she hit somebody. She can see a windmill in the distance, which is sort of a landmark. Mm-hmm. Because people do that too. People need to be anchored to reality. And one of the ways we do that, especially when we're traveling, is to look for landmarks. Things that we know are not going away. Nobody ever says, turn left at the old cow, because the old cow might not be there tomorrow. You turn left at the barn where the old cow lives or something, So she sees this windmill, and that's almost sort of a mile marker for her. And she goes back to see the man that she hit. And what is disturbing, again, it's the unexpected. She tells him, lie still, we'll get you a blanket. I think Trent goes to the trunk to look for a blanket.
Yep.
And the man speaks to her, but in a child's voice, in a teenager's voice.
Yeah, it's the old man that we saw on the bike.
It's the old man on the bike.
But he's speaking with a young voice.
Right. Yeah. And he's speaking with the voice you would have expected the teenager to speak with. And he said, I can't get out. It won't let me out. And there's something so horrific about that, because it's like, what exactly can he not escape? Can he not escape this new body? Or is it that he can't escape this darkness? Like, there's so much implication there of this person probably this teenage boy being imprisoned on multiple levels, being imprisoned in a body that isn't his, in a place that he doesn't want to be in, with no real chance of escape. And it's disturbing, it's disturbing, and it's all in just the voice. It is what he says, but it's partially the voice he says it in that I think terrifies people, and then by the time Trent comes back with the blanket, this boy gets up and rides off into the dark again on his bike, which we come to find is just the nature of this situation that they're getting into, that we have no control over improving our situations, which is also a cosmic horror concept, really.
Well, now, with you talking about it like that, is it possible, he says, I can't get out, won't let me out. From what we come to find, could he be talking about the story itself?
I think he is. Because
I've always thought of it as just the town. He can't get out of the town. But, yeah.
I think it is, and I have a theory which we'll save to the end about who he might be. But yeah, I think it's very possible that what he's talking about is the story. I can't get out of this story, which, again, would completely, if you took it that way, would completely undermine the human ability to have free will, a choice, that you could actually affect your own outcome and save yourself. And that's sort of, that in and of itself is sort of terrifying. Mm-hmm. But a lot of this movie, it works almost on a subtle, almost subconscious psychological level to imply these things without telling you. And that one, I think, is one of the more disturbing scenes of this, is that because if it can happen to this person, teenager, old man, whatever he really is, it can happen to anybody on this road, The other disturbing scene, I think, with Linda driving is that, and now I'm assuming they're going from New York to New Hampshire, which I think is like a 6 or 7 hour drive, right? So figure they leave the end of the workday. And the reason I'm trying to give a time frame is because it becomes important at the end of the scene I'm talking about. So figure if they leave at the end of the workday, they leave at 5 o'clock. They should be wherever they're going by midnight at the latest, if you take it, stop and take a break or whatever. The height of darkness, right? Mm-hmm. You'd still be out there. And in my opinion, one of the things Carpenter does in all of his movies is he goes back and forth between offering subtle implied things and almost like metal in your face, I'm gonna throw this thing at you kind of moments. And this movie is like that too. I think to me it's sort of a Carpenter signature that he does that, because some things, especially in Lovecraft's work, where almost pretty much everything was implied, it's one of the things that I think a more sophisticated, possibly a more jaded audience is turned off by. It's like that which cannot be described. No, describe it. You're the creator, you're the writer. Describe it for me. I want to know what it looks like. And Carpenter does it. He rises to the challenge, and he, in this particular scene, she's driving, he's asleep, and she's having trouble seeing ahead of her because at some point the yellow lines wink out, I think. Mm-hmm. And she's, kind of like, straining to see through the darkness, and she discovers, she hears like storm sounds. Mm-hmm. And she happens to like look out the window because hoping maybe she could see better. And she looks down and there's no road. There's nothing but storm clouds and sky underneath her.
Right.
And they're sort of flashing, blacks and purples and grays and other ominous colors. And just as she has time to register, oh shit, we're not on any road. The tires hit the road again. They connect with a road, a wooden thing, which makes that almost an echo of that clackety sound, because it's a bunch of wooden boards. It's not cards and bicycle wheel spokes, but it is a clackety sound. And it turns out it's one of those covered bridges.
Right.
And by the time she gets to the end of it, it's bright mid-morning. It's
broad daylight.
Broad daylight. Which leads to a funny scene where Trent wakes up and he's looking around and he realizes he slept through the night, and he assumes she drove all night for him so that he can sleep. Yeah, and he's all appreciative, and he happens to look out the window, and there's a sign for Hobbs End. Welcome to Hobbs End. And he says, Styles, you're brilliant. You found it. Great, And she's still processing all of this. There's a little bit of humor. She's still processing all of this, and she goes, "You drive." Yes. She's had enough. She's had enough of this nonsense. And this is where we get into Hobbs End and all of the weird, creepy things that are going on in Hobbs End. I believe before they get to the hotel, they look around town, right? Mm-hmm. And there's several sort of creepy things happening in town that are, and as a writer, when you're writing horror, there's certain things that are the kinds of things that like you try to gauge how a person's going to react to horrific things. Some people are very stoic. Some people are very emotional. But in fiction, you almost kind of, a lot of times you have to try to gauge what is the best reaction for things going on. One of the interesting things about this movie is that weird things keep happening, but they're just strange enough and just sort of, they're just sort of on the edge of surreal, on the edge of weird, that you could almost convince yourself you're not seeing it, or that you're misinterpreting it in some way. Right. And I think that's what these characters are doing, because Styles keeps trying to point these things out, but not in a terrified way, but in a, did you see that? Like, and sometimes they do startle her, and she gets increasingly more, upset as the more time they spend in this town. But he's so quick to dismiss things as being a non-issue, or a hoax somehow, that I think he undercuts her reactions to things. Like they discover that this town is this perfect Norman Rockwell kind of super cute little, New England town, but there's no people around at first. There is a sort of scene, and they do the reverse of what they did earlier in the movie, where the main characters are talking in the background, and they don't happen to notice what we see in the foreground, which is an axe in a block of wood. Right. There's blood on it. Yeah, there's blood on the axe, so it's obviously not just being used for wood. There's a scene that when I first saw the movie, I didn't understand it, but it's a scene of children running, and a dog is running with them.
I think they're chasing the dog.
I know that as the time goes on, the position of the dog changes from running with, but you're right. There, in the beginning, maybe the dog is in the lead, and they're running with the dog, but the dog's ahead of them. Mm-hmm. To a point later in the movie where she sees the same group of kids, and the dog is running for its life, and the children are chasing it. It is a very different positioning, same kind of setup. Children, a dog in the lead, and children following, and they're all running. But how it's done, you can tell from the body language of this running that the threat is different.
And we're still at the point where John Trent is not seeing things.
Right.
He didn't see the kid, then old man on the bike.
Exactly.
And at this point, we see the dog, we see the kids. She turns to him, "Did you see those kids?" He's like, "No, I didn't see anything." Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's something that is getting inside of Styles first, and is kind of upsetting. We get the impression that maybe it's affecting her more because she was Sutter Kane's editor, so she's not just read every book, and this is a nod to editors everywhere. She hasn't just read every book, but she knows these books intimately.
Yes.
She has to in order to, fix them, to, correct continuity errors, or to correct, locational things, or to make something sound better. That's what editors do. So she hasn't just read these books as a reader. She's read them as an editor, and that's a kind of close reading that I think puts her, although we don't know it at the time, in a more precarious position being in this town, because she recognizes places. She knows where to go because she's read about it. She knows the nature of certain people because she's read about them, and she directs him to Pickman's Hotel. And of course, that's a nod to Pickman's model.
To me, that's possibly the most blatant.
That is the most, that and church, but even the church is not nearly as blatant as Pickman's Hotel. Mrs. Pickman, who is played by Frances Bay, is absolutely delightful. I wish the woman was still alive, because she was one of those actresses that could simultaneously be like the cutest little old lady, super funny, or she could be super sinister.
I just can't ever see her and not hear her screaming at Jerry Seinfeld about her marble ride. That's
exactly
my immediate reaction when I see her. Although now I picture her with an old naked man handcuffed to her ankle.
As you would. Yes, she only has a brief part in this movie, but she's good. She's the proprietor of, Mrs. Pickman is the proprietor of Pickman's Hotel. And it leads to a kind of cool scene, which I think there are a lot of little subtle nods to Lovecraft that I think only if you were like an uber Lovecraft nerd like me that you might get them. Like Pickman, in Pickman's model, is an artist, and he paints. There is a painting in the lobby of this hotel, and at one point, Trent asks her, "Did you paint that?" She goes, "Hell no."
Yes,
but it's
that's her delivery.
Yes, her delivery was kind of funny. But there's also a story of Lovecraft's called "The Picture in the House," which also has like sinister implications, that paintings are almost windows to the fevered minds that create these paintings. And it starts out as kind of a nice picture. It's a picture of a couple, and they're walking on the banks of a river, if I remember correctly, and there's like a church, like a Byzantine kind of church in the background. But it's so subtly in the background, it's almost like clouds, It's just a sort of nice little pastoral scene. If you're looking closely, folks, the woman in the picture is the woman in his dream that was one of the people killing the agent in Trent's dream. But she's, otherwise it's this, lovely little picture. And throughout the course of their stay at the hotel, to sort of summarize a couple of different scenes with this picture, it changes over time. The first time it does it, it scares the hell out of Stiles, and she tries to explain to Trent what she saw. And he says, well, and he's like laughing at her. He says, well, if that's what you think you saw, I'd be alarmed too. Because it starts off with this couple holding hands. Then it looks like at some point, and I was never quite sure, you'd have to study the picture, it looks like the woman in the picture is either grabbing the guy's crotch or is holding something else. It's an odd picture, and their heads turn. And that's what Stiles sees. That's what freaks her out, is that the figures in the painting move.
When John Trent first looks at it, the man in the painting is facing away. The woman is maybe a 3/4. She's looking at the man, and we can see her face.
Okay.
And they're together, maybe holding hands. When Stiles looks at it, Linda Stiles, they're both facing away, and the woman turns and looks at her.
And the woman, yes.
And then after that, throughout, again, it changes.
It changes. At one point, the two people are facing each other.
Yes.
And they're both looking at, they're standing facing each other, but they're both looking out from the painting and the woman, there's something wrong with one of her eyes. It's like part of her face is melted, and she's grabbing the guy in some odd way, or she's grabbing something near the guy. It's kind of hard to tell. And the painting does change over time. By the end of their stay, their very brief stay at this hotel, the people are not people anymore. They're two paintings of like old wood, like logs, but they're painted to look like skeletons. Like if you could sort of blend a log or have it formed to look like a skeleton that has fallen over, like a husk, that's what these people have been reduced to in the painting. And it's basically, again, just sort of a psychological reminder, as creepy as it is, it's a psychological reminder that things are changing. People are becoming different. And then they're going from being different to being violent. And then they're going from being violent to being monsters, actual monsters. Which you get also from Mrs. Pickman. When she first shows up, she's sort of rosy cheeked. She looks like someone's little old granny. And as you see, every time you see her in this hotel, at one point he comments, he goes, you look like you've been up all night. Are you okay? And she says, I've been reading, which is sinister at this point in and of itself. And her tone changes, her voice changes, her facial expressions change, and she looks progressively more ill.
Yes.
But they have this, Trent and Stiles have this lengthy discussion. They check into their room before things start to go downhill, and they discuss the books. And Trent is still convinced, this is reality.
Yes.
And what you're proposing here is not. What Stiles is proposing is that maybe Sutter Kane's books aren't fiction, not entirely.
Right.
But that's a big leap of faith, because he talks about monsters from other dimensions and elder gods and things like that. He talks about people becoming creatures. And so it's sort of a big leap of faith. It's more than just, he heavily based this on the town he grew up in. This is actually like nonfiction kind of a belief system here. And he uses as proof, he said, okay, so if what you're telling me is true, then out this window, there should be this Byzantine church with these gold onions on tops. And he opens the window and it's this old falling apart barn. But again, she reads as an editor, not as a reader. And she said, you didn't read closely enough. The view is from the east. And she opens another window. Oh, there's the church.
Yep.
The scene with the church I find fascinating, because my favorite Lovecraft story is The Haunter of the Dark.
Okay.
And The Haunter of the Dark is, it just briefly, it takes place mostly in a church, about a church. And this church is being used basically by cult members at first they had summoned this being, and then realizing they couldn't control it, they imprisoned this being in this church. And it was okay because of the dark of where it was. And the main character of the story ends up inadvertently letting this thing out. But as they are walking to this church to investigate, what's going on, I believe they're reading from Hobbs and Horror, and he lifted whole cloth a passage from Haunter of the Dark, which is that the church was once a seat of evil, older than mankind and wider than the known universe. Yes. Which is just so perfect, because that is so cosmic horribly awful. So awful in its implication. I think it's a good phrase, it's a good description. And they go to this church, and it is clearly not. Then it sort of veers back into Sutter Kane fiction, where they're describing this as like the only recognizable thing about it being a Christian church at all ever was, I believe, Saint Michael. There's like a mural of Saint Michael fighting a demon over the door. Mm-hmm. Except that they don't use the word demon. They basically say one of those from the other side.
Right.
So they're sort of tying the idea that these ancient beings are even older than that, and that if there ever was a force that can stop them, it's almost been swallowed up, you know. Uh, and we have a brief scene where Stiles, again, it's only Stiles. She gets hit in the leg with a ball, and she tosses it back to the kids that are playing. And they start off being these cute kids. The first one or two times she sees them, it's a little crowd of cute kids. This little, cherubic little blonde with a little white sweater. When she sees them again, they look a little worse off. They have that same, red rimmed eyes and, open wounds on the face, and they're not as nice. Instead of saying, "Can we have our ball back?" they're like, "Give it." So she, gives them their ball. And then we see the problem with this church. Okay. Stiles is aware that when they hear car engines, the townspeople are coming, and they do. She gets her and Trent to kind of go out of the way, out of whatever is about to happen, just sort of off grounds to watch, but not be involved in what's about to transpire. And these townspeople show up, and I guess Trent would have left, except that he hears one of the men call out Cain. Call out Cain's name, Sutter Cain's name, and he stops so that he can listen. And the men have guns. They have big guns. And what you find out is that one of the children, this man's son, the man who called out for Sutter Cain, is trapped in the church. You see this because the doors keep opening and closing, and you see the little kid and the little kid and the little kid. Finally, the doors open, and it's Sutter Cain standing there. And Trent confirms with Stiles that this is Sutter Cain, and they say that they want the child back. And rather than do that, rather than give them giving the child back, Cain sends these Dobermans. I believe they're Dobermans. These really rough-looking dogs. Release the hounds, and these dogs attack these people. They try to shoot at them, but it doesn't really work. And so Trent and Stiles flee the scene, basically. And then things just deteriorate from there. They deteriorate in this town. And every step of the way, I feel Trent is given some, proof that this is not fiction, that this is all really happening. And he gets into this big fight with Stiles. And Stiles is saying, "I know you think that we put you up to this. I know you think that she says, "But I know for a fact that we didn't do any of this, that this is all real." And he says, "Well, how do you know?" And she says, "Because you're partially right." Mm-hmm. Ha ha. Okay, so Trent's instincts weren't totally off. You're partially right. We did send Sutter Cain away on a publicity stunt, but he never showed up. And he did send me along with you to make it look good, but we weren't supposed to find anything. But then we did. So she knows this is true because the extent of what they did do was nothing like any of the stuff that they're seeing.
Right.
And she says, and he said, "Well, how do you know all of this then? How'd you know about the men with the guns?" And she said, "Because I read the book." She said, "I was his editor. So not only did I read all of the books prior to this, but I'm the only one who got to see the manuscript of the new book. Me and his agent." And you saw what happened to the agent, basically. So at this point, I think he's had enough. Trent's had enough. And if I remember, he wants to get out of this whole town. He says, this is bullshit. I am not going to help you do this. I am not going to help you, sell your haunted little town to people. I'm checking out. And he goes down to see Mrs. Pickman. She's looking a little worse for wear, as everybody in the town seems to be. And while they're having this exchange, he's sort of checking out the painting, and it has changed again. And so is Mrs. Pickman. And Stiles steals his keys and sneaks out, steals his car and drives off. So now he's kind of stuck. What he doesn't see, and here's an interesting thing that only just occurs to me now, that John Trent, there are many things he should have seen but didn't, like the children running in town.
Right.
He probably should have been able to peek over the front counter, and see that Mr. Pickman was naked and handcuffed to Mrs. Pickman's ankle.
Yes.
And he doesn't. He doesn't see these things, and I almost wonder if it's because he's not quite willing to let go of reality enough yet to be able to actually see these things for what they are. And as that stronghold of his version of reality, as he starts to lose his grip on that, he starts to see more and more and more things that he can't explain, and that the best, practical effects people would not have been able to pull off if this was real life. What we see, one of the creepiest scenes in this movie is with Styles. And we're talking about like sort of pivotal scenes for, this really creepy situation that Carpenter is presenting, and it's with the children. She drives back to the church. I believe her intent is to confront Sutter Kane. It's getting dark, or is dark at this point, I forget. And the children approach her. To say that they're human children is generous. The little cute blonde girl, most of her lips have dissolved away and she's got fangs. And she is standing perfectly still, perfectly balanced on one leg. The other leg is gone. The dog that's with them, something has eaten off one of its legs because it's limping on 3 legs now. The other children look very sick. There's some of them are missing limbs. And the conversation that ensues, as simple as it is, I don't know if it hits me because I'm a woman or a mother or what, but it's chilling. She says, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something like, who are your parents? And they say, you are. Where are you supposed to be right now with you? And then, they're deflecting her questions. And then finally the little girl says, you know what today is? Today is Mommy's Day. And it's so chilling because 2 more seconds with these little kids and it just, it just would have gone horribly wrong. But they let her go because Sutter Kane has a plan for her. The criticism of the special effects in this movie, I'll give it to you that the scene where Linda confronts Sutter Kane, and he basically tells her what's going on. He says that, he thought he was making all this stuff up, but the ones from over there, the other side, the other world, were telling him what to write, and that they were basically giving him the power to make everything real, to create, to bring into reality, to alter reality in such a fundamental way that they could come back. And he shows her the book. He basically like grabs her by the hair and pushes her face down on the manuscript because for his new book, In the Mouth of Madness. And we see those quick flashes again, and they're the things that Trent has seen already. And again, they move forward and backward through time. There's things yet that flashes of her doing things she hasn't done yet. So it's a little mix of everything, but it's very disturbing. And by the time, this sort of flash of things is over, she's bleeding from her eyes and she's completely different. Her mannerisms are different. Her facial expression is oddly, disturbingly peaceful, but not in a good like, she's okay in there kind of way, but just that she's lost any ability to think for herself, reason for herself. There's sort of an odd scene where she's like kissing him or massaging the back of his head, and he's got like another face coming out of the back of the head. I get why people criticize that. It doesn't seem like it would have been necessary, but it does seem to indicate that Sutter Kane has been subsumed, I guess, by whatever this force is, that he is a conduit, is the best way I could describe it. And is okay with that, because there's almost something godlike in being the author, figuratively and literally, of, the end of mankind and the beginning of a new world where these beings, his new publishers, as he puts it, are going to take over. And when Linda Stiles comes back, she says one of the creepiest things, I think, the creepiest line in the movie she has, which is, I'm losing me. I'm losing me. You've got to help me. I'm losing me. So on some level, she's aware that whatever's happening to her, she's losing herself. And even then, I mean, of all the weird body horror that cosmic horror can do, it's that idea of that loss of self, the loss of control of self, that yourself becomes the property and plaything of another higher power. I think that is most terrifying, and that's what we see happening to her, is that she sharply shifts from being Team John Trent to Team Cedric Kane, to the point of being violent toward John, and then he has to flee the hotel. We do see that Mrs. Pickman has completely lost all humanity. She's become this sort of monstrous octopus-like plant thing, which is using her tentacles to chop her husband to little bits and pieces. The townspeople, he runs into a couple of townspeople, like the townspeople, the guy who was looking for his son, he runs into him in a bar because Trent is still holding on to the idea that they are messing with him, that he is somehow, that he wants to stay in this town for no other reason now than to prove that they are just fucking with him, that they are just messing with his, with his head, and that they're he goes, I'll give it to you. You're good. You're clearly professionals, but I will get somebody here to admit that this is what's going on, that you're just messing with me. And the guy tells him again, or another person is telling him, like, you're in this alone now. We can't stop you. He said it took the children first. The children attacked each other, then they attacked us. He has this big bite taken out of his face, this really gory wound, and he said, a 5-year-old did this to me, my 5-year-old, and it's they've given up. The town has given up. They are about to be consumed by whatever this force is that is just making monsters of people. And at some point, John does try to leave. In fact, he tries to leave several times.
Yes.
And he keeps ending up in the same spot. He's not allowed to leave yet. And I think that is when it starts to occur to him that this is maybe something that is not just a hoax. He tries, finally he has to hit Stiles in the face, because I think she punches him and he punches her back, just to knock her out, to bring her in the car. And he tries to leave with her, and she starts babbling odd things to him. She starts kissing him because she says that's Kane is writing her to do. And he pulls over and he like leaps out of the car. He's like, just get away from me. And then you can hear her voice change. It deepens in register. It's like several voices at once. And they have this creepy scene where the door is open, his driver's side door is open, and her head peeks out from behind the door, but at this kind of weird angle.
Yeah, and it's very low.
It's very low. And what crawls out of this car is, it's partially so monstrous because it is like things that we know a head and a neck can't do. And it's got this weird, creepy smile pasted on its face, but it's so well dressed, like impeccably, perfectly dressed. This monster that is crawling after him, skittering after him like some kind of weird, like, broken-necked crab. It's very disturbing. And this is when he basically tries to leave again. He crashes his car because he decides to just drive through people, and they do get out of his way, but he ends up crashing his car, and he wakes up in a confessional. And I believe this is the first time he talks to Sutter Kane.
That's right. I got lost trying to remember the course of events.
Because and it's one of those movies, I have to admit, that despite as many times as I've seen it, after Styles attacks him the first time, a lot of it is a blur, and I think it's meant to be a blur because there's a lot of repetitive things, repetitive flashes of characters, the same action happening over and over again. You know that old saying about, insanity is repeating the same action and hoping for a different result.
Yes.
You get a lot of that in this movie, especially with him like continuing to try to leave. And he ends up first in this confessional where even after everything that's happening, he still has to get his jabs in at Sutter Kane, that he's a hack and that his books suck. And what we come to find is that the reason he's been kept alive, because then he appears in the church and Styles is there. Because again, time and space don't seem to matter much in cosmic horror. They're flexible things. And they're back in the church again, and Kane says, he goes, I have a job for you. He says, I created you. You exist because I've written you into this story, and your job is to take this book back to the world. Well, this is just a complete breakdown for Trent, because he insists that he's real, he knows who he is, that he's not, nobody pulls his strings, he's his own man, like he said in the beginning, that he's not some work of fiction. For a man like Trent, that autonomy is important. And all of the evidence is sort of starting to suggest otherwise. And he refuses to take the book back. But right. then Kane said, well, I can't hold them back any longer. You go, this is your job, this is what you do. He goes, they're coming. And there's a really kind of cool scene. Again, it's 1994, so the special effects are not perfect. But there's a scene where he backs up against this huge door, which is where the things keep like the wood is warping, and you get the impression that the things are being held back behind the door. And he backs up and grabs like a piece of his face and peels himself like he's paper.
Yes.
And he creates this big paper hole. And on the other side of the paper, it's clearly book pages, because you can see the type on the little folds out of the paper. It's kind of a neat scene.
Oh, you can read it.
And you can read it.
I paused it and was reading parts of the book.
Yes, it's parts of the book. And I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's the book Trent is in, right? Because I think they mentioned Trent.
So?
They do mention it's like a scene. What you can catch from the little snippets is that it's a scene of somebody discovering something awful.
Mm-hmm.
And so John Trent goes to this rip, this hole, and he looks through it, and it's this endless chasm of darkness. And it's effective because you don't see what Trent sees. They never show you that downward view of what he sees. Not really. They show you his facial expressions, and behind him is Styles reading from the book In the Mouth of Madness about what Trent is experiencing, how he feels, what he's thinking, what he can see at the bottom of this pit.
She's reading the scene that we're watching.
Exactly. And what that scene is describing is that these atrocities, these monsters, these ancient evils are tumbling upwards from the bottom of this pit and heading towards Trent. And at this point, Trent loses it. He decides he is going to run. He tries to get Styles to go with her, and she says, I can't. I'm in the end. Whatever that means. And so she can't leave. But she gives him the manuscript, and he tries several times to telescope the next bit of it. He tries several times to get rid of this manuscript. He runs down this tunnel, and he's got the book in his hands because I think he's not really thinking about it at the time. And it's the only time you glimpse what is chasing him. And I don't care what people say about the special effects of this part. These are cool monsters.
Yes.
These are the elder things. These are elder gods. These are monstrosities like Lovecraft created. There's tentacles, there's jaws, there's eyes, and that's kind of all you see. There's only one flash of a scene where you see the whole crowd of them moving. Otherwise, all you're seeing of what is chasing him is an eye, a mouthful of super sharp teeth, claws, tentacles. You're seeing snippets of these things until they're almost on him. And then he wakes up in the middle of the street. no car, but it's the place by the windmill.
Yep.
Which is why we had that landmark to begin with, because that apparently marked the edge of weird, And who he sees is a little boy on a bike. And see, here's my theory. That little boy, Hayden Christensen, is like a paper boy. But I didn't notice this till the last time I watched it. He's wearing a jean jacket and jeans. And he has a card.
Yep.
Clipped to his the bicycle spokes.
Yep.
So I almost think like, and when Trent asks him, have you ever heard of a place called Hobbs End? The kid said no. But I almost think again, it's because he was rewritten. That again, time and space, it's not quite, reality is not what it used to be, which is the tagline for the movie. And so Trent has to get back home. He drops the manuscript in the street. And while he's staying at this hotel on the way back to home, because the guy kind of had to like hitchhike home, he finds this hotel, a package is delivered to him. And it's the manuscript. It says John Trent on the envelope. He burns it in the hotel, gets on a bus, has a nightmare about Sutter Kane, where Sutter Kane tells him his favorite color is blue. And when he wakes up, everything is blue. So Sutter Kane is messing with him on this trip. But every time this manuscript is handed to him, he tries to get rid of it. And he goes to, I think, the tourism bureau, and he asks about Hobbs End, trying to prove that somebody will verify that this place exists. And they won't. They said there is not now, never has been, never will be a place called Hobbs End in this state ever. And he's finally makes it back to New York, where Charlton Heston's character, the publisher, tells him, well, that's a pretty fantastic story. If you could write it, we'd publish it. And Trent says, well, he goes, but it's true. That's why I couldn't bring you back the manuscript. And again, reality has been rewritten. And the publisher says, well, I know that's not true. You delivered it to me last month. And he says, it's already been in the bookstore for like 3 weeks. And Trent panics. And he says, well, you got to pull it. He goes, even if everything else I said, it sounds Looney Tunes. He goes, you've got to pull it, because I can tell you for a fact this book is going to drive people insane. And the publisher just sort of blows it off. He said, well, let's hope so. The movie comes out next week. And this is where I think Trent loses it. So we have a scene where...
and he says something about Linda Stiles.
Yes, thank you.
And the publisher, Charlton Heston, is like, I don't know who you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who that is. And Trent says, she's been written out.
Yes. Which is just, but at this point, by saying that, we realize that he's embraced the idea that, reality is changing. This really happened. And he sounds crazy, because he is theoretically the last sane person in the world. What Stiles said is that he's kind of the last one left. And we see him in a trench coat, very similar to what the agent was wearing when the agent attacked him. His hair's all crazy. He looks like he hasn't slept in a long time. And he's outside of a bookstore where there's riots, there's people pushing in line, and this kid comes out. In fact, I think it's the same guy who he initially ran into at the bookstore, who says, he can see you.
Right.
It might be, or it might be, just a kid that sort of has that same like dead-eyed look. And Trent says to him, "Are you enjoying the new book?" And the kid looks up from the book that he's reading. He says, "I love it." And his eyes are bleeding, and he has that weird double pupil thing. And so Trent hits him with an axe. He kills him with an axe. And you get the idea that that's how he ended up in the asylum, that they think he's one of those crazies out there that's attacking people. And the last scenes of the extra, because then we have some shots that mirror the beginning, with the outside of the asylum, with an ambulance. Again, it's pristine in many ways, but there's paper scattered all over the ground now. the ambulance radio is on, but there's like blood smears on the side of the ambulance. The door's open, and you can hear people talking about, violence, and, we're running out of people to send out to, to deal with this violence. And then the inside of the asylum where, Trent is finishing up his story to David Warner, and David Warner leaves, and the administrator of the hospital says, "Well, did you get anything useful?" And David Warner says, "No." And he basically says the truth. He says he believes Cedric Kane's responsible for all the violence. But you get the impression from the way he says it that he says it in that dismissive way so that the hospital people, those people, the violent people, won't know that he's onto them. Right. But you can tell from his face that he is very disturbed by what Trent told him. And he leaves. And the last thing, the administrator says, like, "Do you read Sutter Kane?" And you can almost see the panic. I mean, Warner, he plays it close to the chest, but you can almost see the panic for just a second. Like, that's the thing that the people say. That's the thing that crazy people say. And he doesn't answer. He just leaves. And the very last bit of the movie is more what Trent doesn't see than what he does. Right. Because he's in the cell, and again, there were a lot of indications early on that we thought could have been Trent being crazy, but now we realize is Sutter Kane messing with him. And there's screaming and crying and all kinds of chaos outside in the hallway outside of his cell, and then it just stops. Now, I know that John Carpenter's a musician, so sound, not just music, but sound in general, plays a big part in his movies, and so then, too, does the sudden cessation of sound. Right. Things just go deadly quiet, because in a way, that's almost worse. At least with crying and screaming, okay, people are getting killed, whatever, it is what it is, that jadedness. But, excuse me. But the sudden silence is difficult to read. And what, he tries to peek outside of his, the window to his, on his door to see what's going on. He can't see anything. We can, because the shot pans back and we can see bloody handprints and clear signs of struggle everywhere. There's papers all over the hallway. There's streaks of blood. But he finds the cell door open. And he basically wanders an almost desolate town, where, over sort of like a voiceover, you hear news people talking about violence that's erupted in the streets. It's nearly taken over. Almost everything is destroyed. And a broadcast eventually of, if there's any survivors, we'll try to find you. We'll try to contact you. There's a small group of us left. We're looking for you. So there's like a tiny little bit of hope that Trent ignores, or at least it appears he ignores them, even though he would have been one of them. He would have been somebody that could have, he ignores it because I think he's given up too. And he goes to watch the In the Mouth of Madness movie.
And he just wants to take in a movie.
He just wants to take in a movie. And what I find so sad about it, because he sees his name on the marquee in the movies, and he goes in and he watches the movie, and it's flashes from the experience he just had, sort of rearranged almost as a mind puzzle rather than a movie that we would normally see. And you get the impression that he's alive and sort of untouched by the chaos around him, physically, not mentally, obviously. Yeah. Because Sutter Kane let him live, because he was a messenger. So he is, in essence, part of this hierarchy of people that the old ones are favoring now, simply for doing what they wanted them to, And he doesn't want to be that, because the very last scene of the movie, he just laughs. He starts
Yes.
laughing at the movie and laughing until the laughing becomes crying.
Yes.
And you see that he's just completely lost. He's just given up. And I didn't understand it when I first saw it, why it would end that way. But I think it's because he realizes that he's not alive because of anything he did willingly, anything he did voluntarily. He had no control over his own life and death. And that he's now, if favored is even the right word at all, he's now free because he helped destroy humanity. And it's just too much. It just breaks him, you know? And you almost like you want to root for the people, that little group that you never get to see, that you don't even, that you only know from a snippet even exists of little resistance fighters that are going to try to, save the human race. But it's a cosmic horror story, and the main character's given up because it's a force, like in any cosmic horror story, it's a force that you can't fight, that you could stay out of its way, hopefully, but you can't stop it. And
it will drive you insane.
It will drive you insane to try. And so you don't really have a whole lot of faith that these people are going to be successful. But and that's how it ends. It ends with him laughing, and then the laughing turns to crying, and then it's done. It's like, oh, okay, thank you. Right in the heart.
I do love that there's a very meta moment there at the end. If you look at the In the Mouth of Madness movie poster, when he goes to the theater, it stars John Trent, Linda Stiles, and somebody else. I can't remember who. But it is directed by John Carpenter, written by Michael DeLuca. And if you look closely, all of the crew that are listed are the real crew of this movie.
Oh, that's awesome. I never noticed that.
So the only things that aren't the real people are, instead of saying Sam Neill and
right,
I don't know the actress's name, it's John Trent, Linda
Julie
Stiles.
Carmen, I think her name is. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I noticed that, and I stopped and I looked, and I love that sort of thing.
Yes, that's awesome. I never noticed that before. That's cool.
Wonderful touch. All right. Well, that is In the Mouth of Madness, a wonderful movie.
Absolutely.
So many layers. So before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts at all? Any little things you didn't quite touch on that you wanted to mention?
No, I mean, I think I think I've talked your audience's ear off long enough, but no, I just that if you haven't seen it, I hope the spoilers don't detract from the experience. I definitely think it's a movie worth checking out.
Oh, and I think there's plenty we didn't even mention that for people to enjoy.
Oh yes, absolutely. There's a lot of little details in there, little things that they do, little flash scenes that are it's just amazing.
Yeah, it is fantastic. All right, so that was our discussion on In the Mouth of Madness, the John Carpenter classic. I love it. All right, do you have anything you want to plug?
Just that I saw the new version of Found You is out. So if people want to check that out, if you're looking to complete the collection, it is now available on Amazon. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Crossroad Press did a lovely job with it. That to me, the image there, that's what the Hollower looks like. So it's definitely worth checking out. That and For Emmy, it's one of my favorite novellas. I do a lot of cosmic horror too, so it's a cosmic horror novella about where people go when they go missing. So.
And it has an amazing cover.
Thank you.
All right, and of course, Ghostwriters Podcast.
Ghostwriters Podcast, definitely. We air, I believe it goes live about 7:00 on Thursdays. You can find that any place where you find podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Libsyn, all that stuff. We're there, and we talk bad movies. sometimes good movies, a lot of bad movies, and talk about writing, different aspects of the writing craft and the job itself.
All right, great.
Thank you so much for having me, by the way. This was so much fun.
Thank you for joining me. If you could just stick around, I'm going to do my outro. And so, again, thank you very much to Mary SanGiovanni for being here, discussing In the Mouth of Madness. So you folks, if you have any comments or questions, you know the drill. Put them in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. That's all we've got for you this week. So until next time, read more books.